tried calling 911, but there was no signal. I screamed, but nobody heard me. The elevator was stuck between the 11th and 12th floors, and that man, that stranger, he smiled at me and said, "Finally, we're alone." That's when I realized this was planned. My name is Sarah, and I'm 28 years old. This happened about 8 months ago when I was working as a project manager at a tech company in Seattle. Our office was on the 14th floor of an 18-story building downtown. It was a Friday evening around 9 p.m. Most people had left early. I was heading home after finishing a presentation. When I reached the elevator lobby, it was completely empty. The elevator arrived and I stepped inside alone. Just as the doors were closing, someone yelled, "Hold it." I pressed the door open button. A middle-aged man stepped inside wearing a dark blue maintenance uniform with a name tag that read Building Services. He had a tool belt and a clipboard. He thanked me and pressed the button for the 11th floor. I went back to looking at my phone. Then suddenly, between the 13th and 12th floors, the elevator made this awful grinding sound and jerked to a complete stop. The lights flickered twice, then went out completely. After 3 seconds of total darkness, the emergency lights kicked in. Everything turned dim red. My heart started pounding. The man said not to worry, that this happens sometimes. His voice was way too calm. I pressed the emergency call button. Nothing happened. I pressed it again. Still nothing. I pulled out my phone. No signal. 0 bars. I tried calling 911 anyway, but the call wouldn't go through. That's when I noticed he wasn't trying to call anyone. He wasn't even checking his phone. He was just standing there watching me. I asked if he had signal. He said he didn't bring his phone tonight. Who doesn't carry their phone? I found a panel with an emergency phone inside. I picked up the handset. Dead. No dial tone. The man said he could have told me that wouldn't work. I asked how he knew that. He said he'd been stuck in this elevator before. Multiple times. Always between these same 2 floors. I asked why he kept using it then. He smiled. That smile made my blood run cold. He said because it's the only elevator in the building that doesn't have working cameras. My stomach dropped. I looked up at the ceiling. There was a camera, but the lens was covered with black tape. Fresh tape. I backed against the wall and demanded to know what he was talking about. He reached into his tool belt and pulled out what looked like a small remote control. He held it up and pressed a button. The elevator jerked slightly, like it was trying to move but couldn't. He said, "See? I can make it move whenever I want." I screamed as loud as I could. I screamed for help over and over. He just stood there, not saying anything, not trying to stop me. After about 30 seconds, I stopped because my throat hurt. Nobody was coming. The building was mostly empty and we were stuck between floors where the walls were solid concrete. He told me to calm down. He said he wasn't going to hurt me, but the way he said it didn't sound reassuring at all. He said he just wanted to talk, that we had all the time in the world now. Nobody knew where I was. My friends thought I was still working. It would be hours before anyone realized something was wrong. I asked what he wanted. He didn't answer right away. Then he started talking about how he'd been watching me for weeks. He knew my schedule, knew I stayed late on Fridays. He knew I always took this elevator because it was closest to my office. He said he'd been planning this for a long time. My mind was racing. I thought about my purse. I had pepper spray inside that my mom gave me years ago. I casually moved my hand toward it. He noticed immediately. He told me not to do that. He said if I tried anything stupid, he would have to get physical. But here's what kept bothering me. If he really wanted to hurt me, why hadn't he already? We'd been stuck for almost 10 minutes. He had complete control, yet he was just standing there talking. That's when I realized something. He was enjoying this. The fear in my eyes, the trembling in my voice. This was what he wanted. The psychological torture. I forced myself to calm down and asked his real name. He seemed surprised. He said his name was David. I asked why he was doing this. He said because nobody pays attention to him. He's invisible. He works in this building every day, sees hundreds of people, and nobody even looks at him. But he sees them. He sees everything. As he talked, I noticed something. Every 2 or 3 minutes, the elevator made a soft humming sound, like it was trying to reboot itself. David noticed me listening. He said the building system tries to reset every few minutes. but his device overrides it. As long as he keeps pressing the button, we're not going anywhere. Then he said something that made my skin crawl. Unless you give me a reason to let you go. I asked what kind of reason. He didn't answer directly. Instead, he started asking personal questions. Where did I live? Did I live alone? Did I have a boyfriend? I refused to answer. He said that was fine, that he already knew most of the answers anyway. He'd followed me home before, he knew my apartment number, he knew I lived alone. Hearing him say my exact apartment number made me want to vomit. But then something unexpected happened. The elevator suddenly jolted and started moving down. David looked surprised and quickly pressed the button on his remote multiple times. Nothing happened. The elevator kept descending. He started cursing and hitting the remote against his palm. The emergency lights went off and the normal lights came back on. Within seconds, we reached the 11th floor and the doors opened. A security guard was standing there. He looked confused and asked if everything was okay. Before David could say anything, I pushed past him and ran out of that elevator. I told the guard the elevator had broken down and I needed to report it. The guard said he'd just gotten an automated alert about a malfunction. David stepped out calmly, like nothing had happened. He told the guard it was just a routine mechanical issue. The guard seemed to buy it. I wanted to scream, to tell him what really happened, but I was afraid that, with no proof, nothing would happen to David, and then he'd know I was a threat. So I just said I needed to get to my car and walked toward the stairs. As I walked away, I heard David's footsteps behind me. He was following me. I walked faster. So did he. I reached the stairwell door and pushed through, letting it slam shut. Then I ran down the stairs as fast as I could, taking 2 steps at a time. I heard the door above open and close. He was in the stairwell now, coming after me. I reached the ground floor and burst into the main lobby. There were 2 security guards at the front desk. I ran up to them, out of breath, and said someone was chasing me. They stood up immediately and asked, "Who?" I pointed at the stairwell door just as David emerged. He stopped when he saw the guards looking at him. One guard asked, "What was going on?" David said nothing was going on, that he was just heading home after his shift. He looked at me and said, "Right? We were both just leaving." I told the guards that wasn't true, that this man had trapped me in the elevator and had been stalking me. David looked genuinely shocked. He said I was mistaken, that we'd just been stuck together and he'd been trying to help. The guards looked between us, clearly unsure who to believe. I told them to check the security footage. David immediately said that wouldn't help because the camera in that elevator wasn't working. One guard radioed someone and asked them to pull up footage from elevator 3. After a minute, a voice on the radio said the camera had been offline for the past hour. The guards asked David why he hadn't reported that. He said he'd just discovered it and was planning to report it after his shift. Everything he said sounded plausible. Then I remembered something. I told the guards to check his tool belt. I said he showed me a device that controlled the elevator. David said that was ridiculous, but I insisted. One guard asked David if he'd mind showing them what was in his tool belt. David hesitated for just a second too long. Then he started removing items: a screwdriver, a flashlight, wire cutters, a measuring tape, but no remote. He emptied the entire belt and held his arms out. I felt defeated. Maybe I had imagined it. But then one guard noticed something. He pointed at David's pocket and asked what was in there. David said just his wallet and keys. The guard asked if he could check. David said no, that was personal property, and they had no right. That refusal changed everything. The guard's demeanor shifted. One said they were going to call the police. David said that wouldn't be necessary. He started walking toward the exit. The guard moved to block him and told him to stay until police arrived. David didn't stay. He shoved past the guard and ran toward the door. One guard chased after him, but came back minutes later saying he'd lost him. The police arrived 15 minutes later. I gave them a full statement. They took me seriously. When security confirmed the camera had been deliberately disabled and that David's employee ID had been used to access the maintenance override system earlier that evening. They also found the remote in a trash can near the building entrance. He must have ditched it while escaping. But here's what really made my blood run cold. When they looked up David's employee records, they discovered he didn't actually work for the building. The real David Morse had quit 3 months ago. Whoever this man was, he'd been impersonating an employee for months without anyone noticing. The police never caught him. They searched the building and checked footage, but he'd vanished. They did find evidence he'd been living in a storage room in the basement. There was a sleeping bag, some clothes, and photos. Photos of me, photos of other women who worked in the building. I quit my job 2 weeks later. I couldn't stay in that building. I moved to a different apartment and changed my phone number. I still look over my shoulder constantly. Every time I'm in an elevator alone, I think about that night. The scariest part isn't what happened, it's what didn't happen. What would he have done if that elevator hadn't started working again? I still get panic attacks in elevators. My therapist says it's PTSD, but the worst part? Sometimes, late at night, I think I see him, a figure in a dark uniform, just out of view. That's why I always take the stairs now. Always. My name is Marcus and I'm 34. I work as a pharmaceutical sales rep in Chicago. This happened about 4 months ago at Northwestern Memorial Hospital. It was a Tuesday afternoon around 3 p.m. I'd just finished a meeting on the 22nd floor and was heading to the parking garage. The hospital was busy. When the elevator arrived, it was already pretty full. Maybe 10 people inside. Everyone squeezed in to make room. I ended up in the back corner with my briefcase and phone, scrolling through emails. The elevator stopped at nearly every floor. People got off, more got on. By the 15th floor, maybe 5 or 6 of us were left. That's when I noticed the smell. It was faint at first, like something chemical, but it got stronger as we descended. By the 12th floor, it was unmistakable. It smelled like chloroform or ether. I looked around to see if anyone else noticed. Nobody seemed bothered. Then I started feeling dizzy. Not severely, but noticeable, like I'd stood up too fast. I shook my head, trying to clear it. 11th floor, 10th floor. The dizziness got worse. I put my hand against the wall to steady myself. That's when I realized something was very wrong. Everyone else in the elevator had gone completely still. They weren't moving, weren't talking, weren't even shifting their weight. They were just standing there, facing forward, like mannequins. I looked at the woman nearest to me and said, "Excuse me, are you okay?" She didn't respond, didn't even acknowledge I'd spoken. My heart started pounding. The chemical smell was overwhelming now. I looked at the floor display. We were passing the 8th floor. I reached forward to press the emergency stop button, but my arm felt heavy, like moving through water. My vision started to blur. The last thing I clearly remember was the elevator slowing down, the doors starting to open, and realizing we weren't in the parking garage. We were somewhere else, somewhere darker. When I woke up, I was lying on a cold concrete floor. My head was pounding and my mouth tasted like chemicals. I tried to sit up, but the room spun violently. I stayed down and looked around. I was in what looked like a storage room or basement. Concrete walls, exposed pipes, metal shelving with boxes, a single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling, no windows, one metal door with no handle on my side. And I wasn't alone. The other people from the elevator were there too, all unconscious, sprawled on the floor. I counted 5, including myself. The woman, an older man in a hospital gown, a young nurse, and a teenager. I tried calling out, "Hey, wake up!" Nobody stirred. I crawled to the woman and shook her shoulder. She moaned softly, but didn't open her eyes. I checked her pulse. Steady, but slow. She was alive, just deeply unconscious. That's when I heard footsteps outside the door. Heavy boots on concrete. They stopped right outside. I heard a lock being undone. Then the door swung open. A man stepped inside wearing dark blue scrubs and a surgical mask covering the lower half of his face. But his eyes, they were cold, calculating, studying us like we were specimens. He said, "Good." At least one of us was awake. He said he hadn't been sure about the dosage, that some people took longer to wake up than others. I demanded to know who he was and what he'd done to us. He ignored my questions. Instead, he crouched down next to the older man and checked his pulse. Then his eyes. He nodded like he was pleased. Then he stood up and told me he'd be back in a few hours to check on everyone. He said I should rest, that fighting the effects would only make my headache worse. I asked him what effects. He said the elevator had a modified ventilation system he'd installed months ago. It pumped in a custom mixture of sedatives when he triggered it remotely, just enough to knock people out without killing them. He said he'd been using it to bring people down here for weeks. My mind was reeling. This was a busy hospital, with security everywhere. How had he been doing this without getting caught? I asked him why. He tilted his head like he was considering whether to answer. Then he said, because the hospital took everything from him. His wife had died here 3 years ago from a misdiagnosis. The doctors had missed her cancer until it was too late. He'd sued but lost. The hospital's lawyers had destroyed him in court, so he'd decided to make them pay in a different way. I asked what he was going to do with us. He said that depended. Some people he kept for a few hours then released, with no memory. The sedative caused temporary amnesia. Others, the ones who seemed like hospital staff, those people he kept longer, taught them what it felt like to be powerless. I told him I wasn't hospital staff. He said he knew. He'd been watching me for weeks, knew my schedule. He said I wasn't his target, but I'd been in the wrong place at the wrong time. He'd release me tonight, once the amnesia had set in properly. Then he left, locked the door behind him. I immediately started looking for a way out. The door was solid metal. The walls were concrete. The ceiling was too high to reach. I was trapped. The others started waking up over the next hour. Everyone was confused, disoriented, scared. I told them what the man had said. We tried yelling for help. We tried banging on the door. Nothing. The room seemed soundproof. Hours passed. The bulb stayed on, making it impossible to tell what time it was. The teenager started crying. The nurse tried to comfort her, but she was terrified too. Then the door opened again. Same man, still wearing scrubs and mask. He was carrying a tray with water bottles and energy bars. He set it down and said we should eat and drink, that we'd need our strength. Then he looked at me and said, my time was almost up. He'd be releasing me in about an hour. I asked about the others. He said the older man was a hospital administrator, would be staying longer. The nurse was collateral damage, but he'd release her tonight too. The woman was the wife of one of the doctors who'd misdiagnosed his wife. She'd be staying until her husband understood what he'd taken from him. And the teenager was the daughter of the hospital's chief counsel. She was his insurance policy. The casual way he said all this made my blood run cold. I told him he couldn't do this, that people would be looking for us. He said people looked for his wife too, but they'd looked in the wrong places. He said he'd been doing this for 2 months, and nobody had figured it out yet. About an hour later, he came back, injected me with something that made my vision blur, and the next thing I remember is waking up in my car in the parking garage. It was 11 p.m., 8 hours after I'd gotten into that elevator. My phone showed dozens of missed calls. I stumbled out and went straight to hospital security. I told them everything I could remember. They took me seriously, called the police immediately. But here's the thing. I couldn't remember where the room was. I couldn't describe how we'd gotten there. The amnesia was real. Large chunks were just gone from my memory. The police searched the basement levels but found nothing matching my description. They pulled security footage but found no evidence of tampering. It was like it had never happened, except it did happen. I know it did, and I know there were other people in that room who are probably still missing. I gave the police everything I could remember. Descriptions, what he'd said, timing, all of it. But without physical evidence, without finding that room, it was just my word. I still go to that hospital for work. I have to, but I never take that elevator anymore. I use the stairs, or a different elevator bank. And sometimes when I'm walking through the corridors, I see him, or I think I do. A man in scrubs, with cold eyes watching me. But when I look directly at him, he's gone. The scariest part is knowing he's still there, still operating, still taking people, and nobody believes me enough to stop him. I'm James. I'm 31, and this happened 6 weeks ago. I need to tell someone because the police don't believe me, and my family thinks I'm paranoid. I live in Austin, Texas, in a luxury apartment complex. 25 floors, rooftop pool, good security. I've lived there about a year. 3 months ago, a new tenant moved in across the hall. Unit 17B, directly opposite my door. His name was Derek. Mid-30s, always wore expensive suits. Said he worked in finance. We'd run into each other in the hallway, make small talk in the elevator. He seemed like a regular guy. Maybe a little too friendly. He'd invite me over for beers. I went a couple times. His apartment was barely furnished. Just a couch, a TV, and a bed. He said he'd just moved from New York and hadn't had time to set up yet. We'd watch sports, talk about work, normal stuff. Nothing weird. But then I started noticing things, like how he always seemed to be leaving his apartment at the exact same time I was. Morning, evening, didn't matter. I'd open my door, and within seconds, I'd hear his door open too. At first I thought it was coincidence, but it happened too often. Then there was the way he'd stare at me in the elevator, not obviously, but I'd catch him in the reflection of the doors, just watching me, and he always seemed to know things about my schedule. He'd say things like another late night working, that's 3 this week. Things he'd only know if he was paying very close attention. I started feeling uncomfortable, but I didn't want to be paranoid. He hadn't actually done anything wrong, so I just started avoiding him. I'd check the hallway before leaving. If I heard his door, I'd wait. I stopped responding to his texts. I kept my distance. That's when things escalated. I started having problems with my apartment's smart lock. It would randomly unlock itself, usually in the middle of the night. I'd wake up at 3 a.m. to my phone alerting me that my door had been unlocked. I'd check and it would be unlocked, but nobody was there. I contacted building management. They said it was a software glitch and reset the system. But it kept happening. Every few nights, random unlock, nobody there. I started using the old-fashioned deadbolt at night. Then one morning I woke up and things in my apartment were different. Small things. A book I'd left on the coffee table was now on the kitchen counter. My laptop was closed when I was sure I'd left it open. A glass from the sink was now in the dishwasher. I lived alone. Nobody else could have moved these things. I checked my smart home cameras. The footage from that night was corrupted. Just static. Every single camera, same night, all corrupted. That's when I knew something was seriously wrong. I went to building security and showed them the logs from my smart lock. The pattern of random unlocks always when I was asleep. They reviewed hallway camera footage, but said they didn't see anyone entering or leaving my apartment during those times. They suggested maybe I was sleepwalking, which was ridiculous. So I set up additional cameras, hidden ones that recorded to cloud storage instead of local, and I started sleeping lighter. 3 nights later, I woke up at 2:47 a.m. to the sound of my deadbolt being slid open. Not the smart lock, the manual deadbolt. Someone was inside my apartment. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, whispering that someone had broken in. Then I got out of bed quietly and positioned myself behind my bedroom door with a baseball bat. I heard footsteps in my living room. Slow, deliberate, like someone who wasn't in a hurry. The footsteps moved to the kitchen. I heard my refrigerator open and close. This person was making themselves at home. Then the footsteps came toward my bedroom. I held my breath, gripping the bat. My bedroom door was slightly ajar. Through the crack I saw a shadow move past. Then nothing. Silence. I waited for what felt like forever. Then I heard my front door open and close. Whoever it was had left. I stayed behind the door for another 5 minutes, until I heard sirens. The police arrived and I told them everything. They searched my apartment, but the intruder was gone. When we checked the hidden camera footage, my hands were shaking. And there it was. Clear footage of someone entering using a key, walking around like they owned the place, looking through my things, standing in my bedroom doorway watching me sleep for almost 10 minutes before I woke up. When the intruder's face came into view, my blood turned to ice. It was Derek. He had a key to my apartment and had been coming in while I was asleep. The police went directly to his apartment. They knocked. No answer. They got building management to open the door. The apartment was empty. Not just empty of people, but empty of everything. No furniture, no belongings, nothing. It looked like nobody had ever lived there. The police checked with building management. According to their records, Unit 17B had been vacant for 4 months. There was no tenant named Derek, no lease agreement, nothing. But I had been inside that apartment. I'd sat on his couch, drunk his beer. I had his phone number. We'd exchanged texts. The police looked at my phone. All the text from Derek came from a burner number that was no longer in service. Building management reviewed security footage from the past 3 months. They found footage of me talking to someone in the elevator, in the hallway. But the person I was talking to was always blurry, or partially out of frame, like he'd known exactly where the cameras were and how to avoid them. The police found evidence someone had been living in that apartment illegally. There were tools used to pick the lock, food wrappers, a sleeping bag hidden in the closet. And they found something else, a notebook with my schedule written in it. When I left for work, when I came home, when I went to the gym, everything. There were also pages of notes about my apartment layout, where my cameras were positioned, the model of my smart lock and research on how to hack it. But they never found Derek. They had no idea who he really was, or where he went. The building changed all my locks. They upgraded their security system, but I didn't feel safe there anymore. I moved out 2 weeks later. I'm in a different building now, across town. But here's what keeps me up at night. Whoever Derek was, he spent 3 months learning everything about me. My schedule, my habits, my home. He broke in multiple times just to watch me sleep, and I have no idea what he was planning to do. Or, if he's found out where I live now. I check my locks 5 times before bed. I have cameras everywhere. I barely sleep, because I keep thinking about those 10 minutes he stood in my doorway, just watching me. What was he waiting for? And what would have happened if I hadn't woken up that night?